Most people are taught to move forward without ever looking back, to chase the next goal, the next approval, the next version of success. But what if that's not the way we were meant to live? What if the answers you're searching for are not ahead of you, but behind you? Today isn't about regret. It's not about rewriting the past or wishing you were someone else. It's about understanding that every scar, every mistake, every silent moment you survived has already taught you how to live. When you start from the end, when you imagine who you don't want to become, you begin to see clearly who you need to be right now. This is about overcoming fear by understanding its roots, about finding purpose by tracing pain back to its lesson, about learning to live your life backwards so that every step forward finally makes sense. Most people wake up every morning asking the wrong question. They ask, what should I do today? What should I chase? What should I fix? What should I become? Those questions sound productive, but they are rooted in confusion. They assume the future is something you must invent from nothing. They assume clarity comes from moving forward faster. But clarity doesn't come from speed, it comes from direction. And direction doesn't come from knowing where you want to go. It comes from knowing where you refuse to end up. Living your life backward begins with honesty, not the kind you show the world, not the version you post or explain or justify, but the quiet honesty that happens when no one is watching. The moment when you admit that some versions of success terrify you, that some dreams you were handed feel empty, that some paths everyone praises would slowly erase you. When you start there, when you define what you will not sacrifice, what you will not tolerate, what you will not become, your life stops feeling random. Think about the people who look successful but feel hollow. They followed every rule. They did everything right. They moved forward exactly as they were told. And yet, somewhere along the way, they lost their voice, their stillness, their sense of self. They didn't fail because they lacked discipline. They failed because they never asked themselves who they didn't want to be. They never lived backward. They never checked the ending before committing to the story. When you imagine the end of your life, strip away the titles, the money, the applause. Imagine sitting with yourself in silence. Ask yourself what would make that silence unbearable. Is it regret? Is it betrayal of your values? Is it becoming someone who ignored their inner compass just to be accepted? When you define that fear clearly, it becomes a guide. Fear, when understood, is not an enemy. It is a compass pointing away from what would destroy you. Living backward doesn't mean dwelling in the past. It means respecting it. Every mistake you made already taught you something about who you are not. Every time you felt small, unseen, or compromised, it revealed a boundary you hadn't learned yet. When you trace your life backward, you see patterns. You notice how every time you ignored your intuition, the cost was higher than you expected. You see how every time you chose approval over authenticity, something inside you went quiet. Most people think growth is about adding more skills, more habits, more confidence. But growth is often about subtraction, removing the masks, letting go of expectations that don't belong to you, releasing identities that were built for survival, not fulfillment. When you know the version of yourself you refuse to become, you naturally let go of what leads there. You stop forcing yourself into rooms where you shrink. You stop chasing validation that costs you peace. There is a strange freedom that comes from deciding you're ending first. When you know that you refuse to end your life exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from yourself, your daily decisions change. You don't need motivation speeches every morning. You don't need constant reassurance. You simply ask one question before you say yes or no. Does this move me closer to myself or further away? Does this align with the ending I can live with? People will misunderstand this way of living. They'll say you're too careful, too quiet, too slow. They'll say you're not ambitious enough. But ambition without direction is just movement, and move meant without meaning leads to burnout. When you live backward, you are not passive, you are precise. You conserve your energy for what matters. You stop wasting years proving things to people who won't be there at the end anyway. There's also courage required in this approach, because when you define what you refuse to become, you often disappoint others. You step away from paths they imagined for you. You decline versions of success that look impressive from the outside. You choose alignment over applause. That kind of courage is quiet, doesn't announce itself. It shows up in consistent choices that protect your integrity even when no one is clapping. Living backward teaches you patience. You stop panicking about timelines because you're no longer racing toward an undefined finish line. You know what matters at the end, so you're willing to take slower, truer steps now. You stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. You understand that a meaningful life is not built in straight lines. It's built through reflection, correction, and recommitment. When you trace your life backward, you also develop compassion for yourself. You stop hating your past self for not knowing what you know now. You realize they were making choices with the tools they had at the time. You see that every version of you is trying to protect something, even if they did it imperfectly. This compassion doesn't make you complacent. It makes you resilient. It allows you to move forward without dragging shame behind you. Clarity doesn't arrive as a sudden revelation. It builds quietly as you eliminate what doesn't fit, as you say no more often, as you listen to that subtle discomfort instead of silencing it. Living backward sharpens your intuition because you stop overriding it. You trust yourself not because you're always right, but because you're finally honest. There is also responsibility in this way of living. When you define your ending, you can no longer blame others for your direction. You can't hide behind circumstances forever. You know what you don't want to become, so every choice becomes yours. This responsibility can feel heavy at first, but it's also empowering because it means your life is no longer happening to you. You are shaping it deliberately, even in small ways. You don't need a dramatic moment to start living backward. You don't need to quit everything or reinvent yourself overnight. It begins with awareness, with noticing when something feels wrong, even if it looks right, with paying attention to your energy, with asking yourself, if I keep choosing this, who will I be in 5 years? If that version of you feels distant or disappointed or numb, that's information, not judgment. Information. When you live backward, success becomes personal. It's no longer defined by external milestones alone. It's defined by how aligned you feel with your values, by how often you show up as yourself, by how much peace you protect. This doesn't mean, and life becomes easy. It means it becomes honest, and honesty is lighter than pretense, even when it's uncomfortable. The world rewards forward motion. It applauds speed, hustle, constant growth, but it rarely teaches reflection. It rarely encourages you to pause and ask whether the ladder you're climbing is leaning against the right wall. Living backward is that pause, that moment of stepping off the noise to check your direction. It's choosing meaning over momentum. Over time, this way of living builds quiet confidence, not the loud kind that needs validation, but the grounded kind that comes from self-trust. You stop second-guessing yourself as much. You stop outsourcing your decisions to trends or opinions. You know your non-negotiables. You know your limits. You know what you're protecting. And when life throws unexpected challenges at you, as it always does, living backward gives you stability because your identity is not tied to outcomes alone. It's tied to values. You may lose things, plans may change, but you don't lose yourself as easily. You adjust without collapsing. You grieve without giving up. At its core, living your life backward is about respect. Respect for your future self. Respect for the time you have. Respect for the lessons you've already paid for. It's refusing to repeat patterns just because they're familiar. It's choosing consciousness over autopilot. It's understanding that the ending matters not because it's final, but because it gives meaning. Every step before it. When you know who you refuse to become, every day becomes simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You move with intention. You speak with honesty. You rest without guilt. You pursue growth without self-betrayal. And slowly, without forcing it, your life starts to feel less like a performance and more like a conversation between who you are now and who you're becoming, guided by the quiet certainty of an ending you can live with, an ending that reflects integrity, presence, and a self that was never abandoned along the way, a self that learned to listen, to choose, to walk forward by first looking back, understanding that clarity was never ahead in the noise, but behind in the truth you already lived, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be honored, waiting to guide every next step you take as you continue moving, breathing, choosing, becoming, aware that the path only feels confusing when you forget to ask where you refuse to end up and what kind of person you are protecting with every decision you make as time continues unfolding. Pain is the one thing everyone tries to escape, rush past, or silence. We learn early that pain is something to fix, something to hide, something that means we failed. So we move forward carrying it like a weight we never agreed to pick up, pretending it doesn't affect how we think, how we choose, how we trust. But pain doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits. It shapes you quietly. And it only begins to make sense when you stop running forward and start tracing it backward. Every pain you carry started as information. It was trying to tell you something about a boundary that was crossed, a truth that was ignored, a need that wasn't met. But when you live only forward, pain feels random. It feels unfair. It feels like life happening to you without reason. When you live backward, pain becomes a map. You begin to see where it entered, why it stayed, and what it was trying to protect. Think about the moments that hurt the most, the betrayal that changed how you trust, the failure that made you question your worth, the loss that rewired your sense of safety. At the time, it felt like chaos, like punishment, like proof that something was wrong with you. But when you trace it backward, you start to see context. You remember what you ignored before it happened, the red flags you explained away, the exhaustion you normalized, the silence you accepted when you should have spoken. Pain often arrives after a long period of self-abandonment, not all at once, but gradually. Small compromises, small dismissals of your intuition, small decisions to stay quiet to keep the peace. When the pain finally shows up, it feels sudden, but it was building for a long time. Living backward allows you to see that buildup, not to blame yourself, but to understand yourself. Most people carry pain like a personal flaw. They think, why am I still affected by this? Why can't I move on? Why am I not stronger? But pain isn't a weakness. It's unfinished communication. It's a lesson that hasn't been fully understood yet. When you slow down and trace it backward, you hear what it's been saying all along. There is a difference between reliving pain and understanding it. Reliving keeps you stuck. Understanding sets you free. When you live backward, you don't reopen wounds to suffer again. You revisit them to see clearly. You ask different questions, not why did this happen to me, but what was I believing about myself when this happened? Not who hurt me, but what did this pain teach me about my limits, my values, my needs? Pain makes sense when you see how it shaped your choices, how it made you guarded or distant or overly accommodating, how it taught you to survive in ways that no longer serve you. Some of your habits were born from pain, your independence, your people-pleasing, your silence, your need for control. These were not personality traits. They were strategies. They worked once, they protected you once, but when you live forward without reflection, you keep using old armor in new battles. Tracing pain backward also reveals your strength. You see not just what hurt you, but how you endured it, the nights you got through without answers, the mornings you showed up despite the weight, the resilience you developed quietly. Pain didn't just take from you, it also built something in you: perspective, depth, empathy, discernment. These didn't appear randomly. They were forged. There is honesty required here, because when you trace pain backward, you may discover uncomfortable truths, that you stayed longer than you should have, that you ignored yourself, that you hoped someone would change instead of protecting your boundaries. This awareness can sting, but it is not meant to shame you. It is meant to return power to you, because once you see the pattern, you can stop repeating it. Pain loses its grip when it is understood. not when it is justified or minimized, but when it is acknowledged fully. When you stop arguing with your own experience, when you allow yourself to say, this hurt and it mattered, living backward gives you permission to validate your pain without letting it define you. Many people rush healing because they want to feel better quickly, but healing is not about speed. It's about integration. It's about letting the lesson of pain become wisdom instead of bitterness. When you live backward, you integrate pain into your story without letting it control the ending. Pain also teaches you what you value, what hurt is ofte, and connected to what mattered. You don't feel deeply about things that mean nothing to you. If betrayal hurt, it's because loyalty mattered. If rejection hurt, it's because connection mattered. If failure hurt, it's because growth mattered. Pain points directly to your values. When you trace it backward, you don't just understand what broke you, you understand what you care about. This understanding changes how you move forward. You stop dismissing your reactions as overreactions. You stop gaslighting yourself into silence. You listen more closely to discomfort. You respect your emotional responses as signals, not inconveniences. Pain becomes guidance instead of noise. Living backward also softens your relationship with others. When you understand your own pain, you stop projecting it as much. You stop expecting people to heal wounds they didn't create. You stop reacting from old injuries. You respond from awareness. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm. It means you choose clarity over chaos. There is grief in this process. Grief for the time you spent hurting without understanding why. Grief for the versions of yourself that suffered quietly. Living backward allows you to honor that grief instead of suppressing it. And grief, when honored, turns into acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means release. Pain makes sense when you see how it redirected you. Some doors closed because they would have led you somewhere unsafe. Some endings happened because you were meant to grow beyond them. At the time, it felt like loss. Looking backward, it reveals alignment. Not everything that ended was meant to last. Not everything that hurt was meant to stay. When you stop seeing pain as punishment and start seeing it as instruction, your relationship with life changes. You become less reactive, less afraid of discomfort. You trust that even when things hurt, there is meaning forming beneath the surface, meaning that will reveal itself when you take the time to look back with honesty instead of judgment. Living backward doesn't erase pain, it transforms it, takes something heavy and turns it into something useful. It gives pain a place in your story without giving it the final word. You carry it differently, lighter, wiser, with understanding instead of resentment. Over time, you notice that the pain you once thought ruined you actually refined you. It taught you where to draw the line, when to walk away, when to speak, when to choose yourself. These lessons were not gentle, but they were precise, and when you trace them backward, you stop fighting your past and start learning from it. Pain stops repeating when its lesson is learned. Until then, it finds new forms, new situations, new faces. Living backward interrupts that cycle. It helps you recognize the pattern before it becomes another wound. You pause, you choose differently, you protect what matters. At its deepest level, understanding pain backward is an act of self-respect. It says my experiences mattered, my feelings were valid, my story deserves to be understood. And from that place, you move forward not as someone trying to outrun their past, but as someone who has finally listened to it, integrated it, and allowed it to become part of their strength, part of their discernment, part of their quiet confidence as they continue walking through life, aware that pain was never meaningless, never random, never wasted, but a teacher that only reveals its lesson when you stop running forward blindly and turn around long enough to understand where it began, what it asked of you, and how it shaped you into someone capable of choosing more wisely, more honestly, more intentionally with every step that follows as your life continues unfolding, guided not by fear of pain, but by the understanding that pain, once traced backward, becomes clarity that moves with you, steady and grounded, shaping how you live, how you love, how you protect yourself, and what you allow as you continue forward with awareness instead of avoidance. Most people spend their lives searching for purpose as if it's something hidden far ahead of them, as if one day, after enough effort, enough struggle, enough proof, it will suddenly appear and explain everything, so they rush forward, chasing clarity, trying to force meaning out of uncertainty. But purpose doesn't reveal itself through speed, it reveals itself through perspective. And perspective comes when the end is no longer a mystery, when you don't know how you want your life to feel in the end. Every choice feels heavy, every decision feels risky. You hesitate, overthink, doubt yourself, not because you're incapable, but because you're aiming at a target you can't see. Living your life backward removes that fog. It doesn't give you all the answers, but it gives you direction. When you understand the kind of ending you want, purpose stops being a question and starts becoming a filter. Purpose is not a job title. It's not a single achievement. It's not something you stumble upon accidentally. Purpose is alignment. It's the quiet consistency between what you value and how you live. But you can't measure alignment unless you know where you're trying to end up. When the ending is unclear, you borrow goals from others. You chase milestones that impress but don't fulfill. You stay busy but feel empty. Imagine reaching the later years of your life and looking back at the choices you made. Not the highlights, not the moments that look good on the outside, but the daily decisions. The way you treated people, the way you treated yourself, the way you handled fear, conflict, failure. What would make you proud in that reflection? What would make you uneasy? When you sit with those questions, honestly, purpose begins to form. When the end is no longer a mystery, you stop panicking about doing everything. You stop trying to be everywhere, to please everyone, to prove your worth constantly. You realize that a meaningful life is not built through endless options, but through intentional limitations. You choose depth over noise, integrity over performance, presence over pressure. Purpose becomes clearer when you understand what you want to stand for, when everything else is stripped away, when success no longer protects you, when youth no longer distracts you, when time no longer feels unlimited. Those imagined moments are not meant to scare you. They are meant to anchor you. They remind you that your time is finite and therefore valuable. Living backward shifts your relationship with ambition. You don't lose it. You refine it. You stop chasing success at the cost of yourself. You stop confusing motion with meaning. You pursue growth that you can live with, growth that doesn't require self-betrayal. Purpose doesn't demand that you exhaust yourself. It asks that you be honest. When the ending is clear, you stop measuring your life against timelines that don't belong to you. You stop asking why you're behind. You stop feeling rushed by other people's progress. You understand that a life lived with intention cannot be rushed. Some things take time because they are meant to be built slowly, carefully, with awareness. Purpose also becomes quieter. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up in how you listen, how you choose kindness when it's inconvenient, how you walk away from what doesn't align even when it costs you comfort. These moments don't look impressive from the outside, but they shape the ending more than any achievement. When the end is no longer a mystery, fear loses some of its power. You're still afraid, but you're no longer paralyzed by it. You can face uncertainty because you know what you're protecting. You know what kind of person you want to be, even if you don't know exactly how you'll get there. Purpose doesn't eliminate fear. It gives you a reason to move through it. This clarity also changes how you handle failure. Failure no longer feels like proof that you're off track. It becomes feedback. You ask different questions. Not did I mess up, but did this move me closer to or further from the ending I want? Some failures still hurt, but they don't derail you completely. They redirect you. Purpose is revealed when you stop trying to control every outcome and start committing to your values. You realize that you may not control how everything turns out, but you can control how you show up. You can control whether you act with honesty, courage, compassion. When those become your priorities, purpose is no longer fragile. It doesn't disappear when plans change. Living backward also helps you recognize distractions. Not everything that excites you is aligned with your purpose. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. When you know your ending, you become selective. You learn that saying no is not a loss. It's protection. You conserve your attention for what matters most. Purpose deepens when you accept that your life will include contradictions, strength and doubt, confidence and fear, clarity and confusion. You don't wait to be perfect to live meaningfully. You move forward imperfectly but intentionally. The ending you envision doesn't require flawlessness. It requires presence. When the end is no longer a mystery, you treat people differently. You stop using them as stepping stones. You stop seeing relationships as transactions. You understand that connection is part of purpose, that how you make people feel will outlast most of what you achieve. This awareness humbles you. It grounds you. Purpose also asks for responsibility. Once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend you don't know what matters to you. This can feel heavy at first, but it's also freeing because it means your life is no longer driven by confusion. It's driven by choice. Living backward reminds you that purpose is not something you find once and keep forever. It evolves as you evolve, but the core stays the same. Your values deepen, your understanding matures, your definition of a meaningful ending becomes more refined, and with each refinement, your daily life becomes more intentional. You begin to notice that the small choices matter more than the big declarations. How you speak when you're tired, how you act when no one is watching, how you treat yourself when you fall short. These moments shape the ending far more than dramatic gestures. When the ending is clear, life feels less chaotic even when it's difficult. You don't need constant certainty. You trust the direction. You allow life to unfold without losing yourself in it. Purpose becomes a steady presence rather than a distant goal. At its deepest level, purpose is about coherence, the sense that your inner world and outer actions are aligned, that you are not living in constant contradiction, that you recognize yourself in the life you're building. When the end is no longer a mystery, coherence becomes possible. You stop asking, what am I supposed to do with my life? And start asking, how do I want to live today in a way that I can stand by tomorrow? That question simplifies everything. It doesn't remove difficulty, but it removes confusion. Living your life backward doesn't make you passive, it makes you intentional. It allows you to move forward with clarity instead of urgency, with purpose instead of pressure, with direction instead of noise. And as each day passes, you don't feel like you're chasing meaning anymore. You feel like you're embodying it step by step, choice by choice, grounded in the understanding that the ending you're moving toward is not defined by applause or perfection, but by integrity, awareness, and a life lived in alignment with what truly mattered to you all along. As time continues moving forward, guided by a purpose that was revealed, not by rushing ahead, but by looking back, understanding the destination and choosing each moment accordingly.